Hello everyone, my name is Meghan LeVota. I'm an ENFJ and I'm going to continue on my series of things that I've learned about life by observing insert personality type here. Today I'm going to talk about ENTP. Now the insights that I'm about to share are things that I have gleaned through seeing how ENTPs interact over Facebook comments, people that claim to be ENTPs, ENTPs that I know in my life, in my personal life, ENTPs who have been friends of mine, who have given me specific advice, and sort of generally what I have noticed about what NE and TI combine together. What sort of insights does that perspective pick up about life? Because in my opinion, each of the 8 of Carl Jung's cognitive functions is just one different way of looking at life. And so, as I'm sure you know, ENTPs, there are many different angles of looking at life. I don't need to tell you that. But essentially, what I'm wanting to get to in this series that I find really fascinating is how you can learn insights about how life is based on just sort of shifting your perspective. So I'm gonna get right into it because I know you guys hate long disclaimers. The number one thing that I have realized about life through observing and interacting with ENTPs is you don't know unless you also know what you don't know. ENTPs, in my experience, are really afraid of the unknown unknowns out there, and a lot of them use that term a lot where they say, well, there's the known knowns and then there's the known unknowns, but then there's also the unknown unknowns. And so an ENTP isn't really confident in their perspective unless they have converted as many of those unknown unknowns into at least known unknowns, hopefully known knowns. ENTPs never stop questioning their perspective. They don't, whenever they land on a perspective, that doesn't mean that they have stopped questioning, because ENTPs know how many unknown unknowns there are, and so they're going to continue to ask questions and continue to put their own perspective and the perspective of others underneath a microscope to sort of make sure that they aren't leaving out any unknown unknowns that could just whack them in the face unexpectedly. So I really admire this in an ENTP, because even whenever they are really stubborn and really strong in their opinion and they might be arguing with you, if those of you who aren't ENTPs might be taken aback by that, because you might view that as really condescending or arrogant or nitpicky or all these other things. You have to remember that, the ENTPs, they're just wanting to explore that idea with you, and they're inviting you to explore it together. And they're wanting information from you. And I have noticed, correct me if I'm wrong, that ENTPs can get a little angry with people who won't really share how their beliefs were formed, not because they're necessarily critiquing you or your idea, but they want to know how the idea was formed so that they can sort of check off their boxes of what have I taken into consideration into this belief. So even though ENTPs can be really good arguers, they also have an extreme open mind. And so I have wanted to apply this perspective to my life as well, because as an ENFJ, I tend to stick to my beliefs pretty firmly because it takes me a really long time to get there, and once I'm there, I kind of stay there. And that's kind of what it's like to have inferior introverted thinking, because I do value introverted thinking like you do, but for me, I don't feel as comfortable talking about things I don't necessarily know for sure. And so I will just sort of observe, and my introverted thinking will be more silent and on the back burner, whereas ENTPs engage in their introverted thinking when talking to people, and their ideas are being questioned in real time. Where for me, honestly, my ideas, I question them alone on my own time, or like without really discussing them with people, which what I've really learned through ENTPs is that that's not always the best way to, what's the word I'm thinking of? Troubleshoot. That's not really the best way to troubleshoot my ideas. Whenever I keep my mouth shut about what I believe and what I think, I'm not really doing any troubleshooting of whether or not what I'm saying is true, or whether or not I've considered all of the potential, potential factors that could be at play. For me, I really just take my own sweet time coming to a conclusion through observing and sort of talking to people and nodding my head at what they're saying. And then I will sort of go out there and be like, all right, guys, this is what I have decided. And yeah. And it's normally the ENTPs that question me and honestly make me sometimes very insecure in my own idea because I'm not used to voicing it. And can make me sometimes on edge, but at the end of the day, I really do appreciate that about the ENTP, because they're really just trying to make sure that you've considered every angle. Because I used to sort of think, if I know something in my gut, then I know it, but I think the NE thinks about what things are not. They don't just think about what things are. And for me, I use extroverted sensing, which is way more focused on what is, and NE is focused on also what not is, or what could be, or what it used to be, or other ways of being. That's why I sort of think of NPs as really viewing life as like all these different dimensions and stuff like that. NPs, I know, especially NTPs, seem to be really interested in the concepts like time travel and multi-dimensions and stuff like that, because there's always this like what if, what could be. And I don't normally look at my opinions through that lens. I go with what I feel is right. And so the perspective of an ENTP has taught me to think that through a little bit more and scrutinize myself more. And I think also I've learned to share my opinions even before they're 100% bulletproof, because I think ENTPs know that there's always going to be a little bit of unknown out there, and you have to sort of be prepared for it. Where you can say your opinion strongly, but you also always have to be open to being wrong. Because for me, sometimes I'd be very black and white of like, if I don't know it's true, I'm not going to say anything. But then once I said something, I have looked at every angle, which a lot of times it's not really every angle, it's just in my own head or with my own people. But ENTPs, when they open their mouth to share their opinion, they're always aware of the unknown out there, and they're always aware that there could be evidence or a perspective or something that can completely knock off what they have been thinking. But the thing I really admire though about ENTPs is that they aren't going to just change their mind that easily. They're going to always just integrate what they've learned with their perspective that they've already built. And so by that sense, they're always growing. And they're always seeking learning opportunities. And they also, in my experience, tend to be very well-rounded individuals. They don't just stick to one thing that they're learning about. And so I really admire the ENTPs that have figured out how to have a bunch of different interests and then combine it with something new. And then let's say you're interested in like something like personality types, but then you're also interested in technology and coding. There you go. You have this really sort of mental activity, which is coding, and then you also have this personality-driven, social-driven thing that you think about. And so if you integrate both of those perspectives into your worldview, then what you're able to produce is going to be a combination of two different sort of industries or topics. And ENTPs have really fresh perspectives because they're able to integrate all of these different topics or that are normally honestly siloed out. And siloed thinking, I'm sure you guys know, is not very good in my opinion. Like when you look at companies, and like the HR is over here and the communications over here and then the sales is over here, and people don't talk in between those silos or in between those groupings. I think that ENTPs are the sort of people that want to break those down, and they're just like, hey, I have these multiple interests and I'm going to keep exploring them, and whenever I share my perspective, it is taking into consideration these different views that I have looked at before. And so what I've learned from an ENTP is to keep expanding. Don't just go down one route. You aren't going to know all there is to know if you go down too far of like a sort of NI like niche interest, because sure, you might be specialized or you might be an expert in some sort of way, but ENTPs are kind of like the jack of all trades sort of people, because they really know that innovation is, you know, innovation starts in those sort of gray areas, or whenever you, that's when things start to get exciting, is when you are mixing all of these sort of different perspectives. And so I would encourage anyone listening, whether you're an ENTP or not, to be curious about different topics and see how the knowledge and the curiosity you have from those different topics can come up with a completely new perspective about life or about business or about something that you can share that is unique to you. ENTPs are very unique. They do what they want to do, and they want to be true to themselves. And that being true to themselves, whenever they do decide to speak and share what their opinion is, it really is a culmination of a bunch of stuff. So, what else do I want to talk about? I'm sorry if some of you guys think that I'm repeating myself over and over. Something I have learned from ENTPs is that sometimes it helps to explain things in multiple ways, and to give examples of things when you're talking about them. I don't know if you guys realize that you do this, but when ENTPs tell stories, I've noticed that they like to give examples. And sometimes I don't really do that. I'll just say something in like a sort of extroverted sensing way, but ENTPs, they use like these sort of details or stories to back up what they're saying, or like an anecdote normally. ENTPs are really adaptable, and so they don't really expect things to stay constant, and that's, I think, part of the reason why they pursue different interests, because they want to make sure that they are always going to be useful no matter what the external circumstances. And so I really think that's a great thing to learn from, because whether you're a J or a P, nobody knows what the future holds exactly. J's might think they do, because J's like to plan their life in a very sort of static way at times compared to P's, but it's a great thing to think about, is how can I make sure that I have skills that are inherently me and that I love doing and that will make me useful no matter what the circumstance. I think honestly a lot of TJs will be like, I'm gonna go to school to be a doctor. And then let's say 20 years from now, the doctor industry, the medical industry is completely disrupted. Then what? If you were only trained to be a doctor by the book, then if you only went by the book, then what are you gonna do now? ENTPs don't really go by the book. They are themselves, they have their perspective and their skills, and they can just apply it to whatever situation you throw at them. That's why a lot of them can be great entrepreneurs. But I think they also seem to have a knack for looking at what the future might hold, for example, like cryptocurrencies or things like that. Or maybe some of them have predicted that social media would be bigger, or that the internet would be big. I don't know. And they will pursue that because they might just get a sense that it could help them be useful in the future. So some insights I've sort of learned is really about branding yourself and acquiring skills because you want to do them and sort of playing by your own rules. And even though ENTPs don't use introverted feeling, which means that they might lack that sort of identity as far as what are my values, who am I, what do I stand for, ENTPs still have a pretty good idea of who they are. It's just not really based on an introverted feeling way. It's more based on, what do I like to do in this world? What tasks do I find fun? How do I like to spend my time? That sort of thing. I also think ENTPs are pretty amazing at smoothing over conflict whenever they do tap into their tertiary extroverted feeling. Sorry about that. They're able to sort of explain why they're doing something or why they feel a certain way, because they won't really explain how they feel, or they won't do something based on a feeling unless they have that introverted thinking that knows why. And so they're normally extremely tactful when it comes to difficult things like laying someone off or quitting a working relationship. A lot of them seem to have a little harder of a time like going through a breakup necessarily, because they might not really know how to do that tactfully, but you know, in some scenarios they can smooth things over, and especially in like a group environment, they can smooth things over pretty well. And another thing I really like about them that I think that we can all learn from is that everyone has a reason for why they do things. It might not be a good reason, but everyone still has a reason, even if they aren't aware of it. And ENTPs, in my experience, correct me if I'm wrong, they tend to view life that way, where they kind of expect other people to have reasons for why they're doing things, and they treat them as such, and they're curious about those reasons, and they're always trying to discover those reasons. And I think that could be a really fruitful way to be, and a really easy way to grow, because if you recognize that people have their own rationale, then you aren't gonna be able to look past them as easily. ENTPs are good at asking questions, especially when something doesn't quite make sense to them, like somebody's reasons don't make sense to them. So they aren't really afraid to take a new person or a new opportunity that is around them. They aren't really afraid to take a risk, I guess you could say, and ask them a question. If they see that there's a reason for what they're doing that is not a reason that they've incorporated already with their worldview, they're probably gonna ask, not because they necessarily want to incorporate that in their worldview. They might think that you are full of shit. I'm very interested in astrology, actually, and I've had a lot of ENTPs be very inquisitive about this to me, even though some of them might like astrology. In fact, I do know some ENTPs that do. But for those that do not see the rationale behind it, they might think that I'm total full of shit, but they'll still be just as curious about it anyway, because they would want to know why someone would think that. And honestly, I've had a lot of comments on my channel from ENTPs that have downright disagreed with me, but they have still asked me about why I think how I think. Because I think that ENTPs are always viewing disagreements and conflicts as a way to either enhance their own perspective or to change their perspective. They're always willing to bend it, but they also always welcome the opportunity to go deeper into their perspective. So anyway, to sort of wrap that up, I really enjoy the inquisitive outlook that ENTPs have, and just the way they think about knowledge and acquiring knowledge in general, and making sure that you have an individual use that is uniquely you, and being, unique and, innovative. I kind of have talked about a lot of stuff. I hope that was useful to you. I hope that I wasn't repeating myself or going about in circles. That's just how NINTI rolls. If you wanted a shorter video, sorry. But thank you so much for watching. I hope that those of you who were not ENTPs can learn from this perspective and maybe understand some ENTPs that you know. And I hope that some ENTPs watching could be more happy with themselves and realize that, you know, not everyone is like that. So, you know, you're special, I guess. Please join my Facebook group, Personality Typology for Self-Growth. That I will link below. And we have lots of discussions on there about how to learn from others through the cognitive functions. I would love to see you there, and have a wonderful evening.